In a prestigious law office, a disinherited daughter was about to uncover her father's final game. What started as a routine will reading took a shocking turn when her rebellious sister inherited everything. Claire Walker-Morrison wasn't your typical grieving heir. For 32 years, she had been the perfect daughter, known for unwavering family loyalty. When her estranged sister Lanie inherited their father's $50 million empire, Claire had no idea she was walking into an elaborate posthumous test. Her explosive reaction would lead to an impossible ultimatum. What began as devastating betrayal would become a sisterly reckoning that would forever change the Walker legacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany walls of Chen and Associates seemed to close in with each passing minute, their dark wood paneling absorbing what little warmth the autumn afternoon offered. Eleanor Walker sat with her spine perfectly straight, her black Chanel suit immaculate despite 3 days of funeral arrangements and sleepless nights. Her hands, usually steady from years of charity galas and board meetings, trembled almost imperceptibly as she smoothed her skirt for the dozenth time. Beside her, Claire Walker-Morrison embodied composure in the way she'd been trained since childhood, shoulders back, expression neutral, every strand of her auburn hair in place. But the slight tension around her eyes betrayed the weight she'd carried these past 72 hours. As the eldest daughter and Jonathan Walker's clear successor, she'd handled the funeral arrangements, managed the flood of condolence calls from business associates, and coordinated with the staff at Walker Financial. The reading of the will felt like a formality before she could officially step into the role she'd been groomed for her entire life. Marcus Morrison shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair beside his wife, his usually confident demeanor subdued by the gravity of the moment. He'd married into the Walker family 5 years ago, but the weight of their expectations still caught him off guard sometimes. Today, he found himself calculating mortgage payments and school districts, wondering if Claire's inheritance would mean they could finally afford the house in Beacon Hill she'd been eyeing. Samuel Chen adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and glanced at the ornate clock on his desk. 28 years of practicing law had taught him to read families like financial statements, every gesture, every silence revealing the complex equations of love, obligation, and resentment that bound them together. The Walker family had always been particularly intricate in their dysfunction, and today's reading would either heal old wounds or split them open entirely. "We should begin," Samuel said quietly, though his gaze lingered on the empty chair positioned slightly apart from the others. "Rosa, would you?" The office door opened with a soft click, and Rosa Martinez entered, her weathered hands gentle but firm on the shoulders of the young woman who followed reluctantly behind her. Lanie Walker looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her black dress, clearly borrowed and slightly too large, seemed to emphasize how out of place she felt among her family's polished grief. "I'm sorry we're late," Rosa said, her accented English carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 2 generations of Walkers. Traffic was terrible coming from the airport. Lanie hadn't spoken to her father in over a year. Their last conversation had ended with his voice raised in disappointment over her decision to turn down the gallery, showing he'd arranged, too controlling, too much like buying her success instead of earning it. She'd hung up on him, and pride had kept the phone silent on both sides ever since. Now, surrounded by family members who'd maintained their connections to Jonathan Walker, while she'd stubbornly chosen distance, her presence felt like an intrusion. Claire's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as Lanie took the remaining seat. Even in grief, even at their father's funeral, Lanie had managed to arrive late and disheveled, reinforcing every assumption Claire had ever made about her sister's priorities and character. Samuel cleared his throat and opened the leather portfolio before him. "Thank you all for being here. I know these past few days have been incredibly difficult." His eyes lingered on Eleanor, who seemed to be staring at something beyond the window. "Jonathan asked me to read his will in its entirety, without interruption. There will be time for questions afterward." The formal language of legal documents filled the room as Samuel began, his voice steady and professional. "Minor bequests to longtime employees, charitable donations to organizations that had meant something to Jonathan, specific items designated for friends who'd stood by him through decades of business and personal challenges. Rosa received a generous pension and lifetime residence in the guest cottage at the family mansion. Eleanor inherited the house in Martha's Vineyard and a substantial trust fund. Claire found herself unconsciously straightening in her chair, preparing for the moment when Samuel would read the primary bequest, the bulk of Jonathan Walker's $50 million estate, along with controlling interest in Walker Financial. She'd earned this inheritance through years of dutiful service, business school excellence, and careful cultivation of the relationships that mattered to their father. Even Marcus seemed to relax slightly, perhaps calculating the comfortable future that waited just beyond Samuel's next words. "To my daughter, Melanie Catherine Walker," Samuel continued, and the room held its breath. "I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including all financial assets, real property, and controlling interest in Walker Financial Group." The silence that followed felt like a physical thing, pressing against the walls of the office with the weight of 30 years of family assumption and expectation. Eleanor's hands finally stilled in her lap. Marcus's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Rosa's expression remained carefully neutral, though something flickered behind her eyes. Not surprise, but perhaps satisfaction. Claire felt the world tilt sideways. The careful composure she'd maintained through the funeral, through the endless condolences and business calls, cracked like ice under sudden pressure. "What did you just say?" Samuel's voice remained steady, though he avoided meeting Claire's eyes. "Your father has left his entire estate to your sister Lanie. That's impossible." Claire's voice rose, her professional training in crisis management completely abandoned. "There has to be a mistake. I've been managing his accounts, his calendar, his entire business operation for the past 5 years. I gave up my teaching job. I gave up my graduate program. I've been preparing for this my entire life." Lanie sat frozen in her chair, staring at Samuel as though he'd spoken in a foreign language. $50 million. The family business. The mansion where she'd grown up feeling like a perpetual disappointment. It made no sense. Her father had spent years criticizing her choices, dismissing her career, expressing disappointment in every path she'd chosen that diverged from his vision of success. "There must be some provision," Marcus said, his own shock evident. "Some condition or no conditions," Samuel replied firmly. "The will is quite clear. Lanie inherits everything." Eleanor spoke for the first time since entering the office, her voice carrying a strange note of calm that seemed disconnected from the chaos erupting around her. "Jonathan always did like his surprises." The comment hung in the air like smoke, and Claire turned to stare at her mother with something approaching betrayal. "You knew about this?" "I knew your father was planning something," Eleanor said carefully. "He spent a lot of time with Samuel these past few months. A lot of time alone in his study, writing." She paused, her gaze moving between her daughters. "I didn't know what, specifically." Claire stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is insane. Lanie hasn't even spoken to him in over a year. She didn't even want to come to the funeral. I had to handle everything. The arrangements, the business, the family obligations. And this is how he rewards that loyalty?" "Claire," Lanie started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't." Claire's composure had completely shattered now, years of suppressed resentment spilling over. "Don't you dare try to make this about fairness or father's hidden wisdom or any of that garbage. You walked away from this family. You rejected everything he offered you. You made it crystal clear that none of us mattered, compared to your artistic integrity or whatever you called it." "That's not." Lanie tried again, but Claire's voice rose over her. "You didn't even know he'd been having chest pains. Did you know he collapsed in his office? Did you know he spent his last conscious moments asking for you?" Claire's voice cracked, and tears she'd been holding back for 3 days finally began to fall. But apparently, none of that matters. Apparently, being the responsible daughter, the one who stayed, the one who cared about this family's legacy, counts for nothing. Marcus reached for his wife's hand, but she pulled away, her professional mask completely gone now. 28 years old, and you inherit an empire. Just like that. No experience running a business. No understanding of the responsibilities involved. No appreciation for what it took to build all of this? She gestured wildly around the office, as though it represented the entire Walker legacy. But sure, Daddy's little artist gets it all. The cruelty in her own voice seemed to shock Claire back to some measure of control, but the damage was done. Lanie sat motionless, absorbing each word like physical blows. Rosa moved closer to Lanie's chair, her presence protective and fierce. "That's enough," Eleanor said quietly, but her words carried unexpected authority. "Claire, sit down." "I won't sit down. This is my life we're talking about." "Our life," she added, glancing at Marcus. "We were planning to start a family. We've been waiting for the financial security to—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung heavy in the room. Samuel had witnessed family disintegrations before, but the Walker women's pain felt particularly acute. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess." "No." Lanie's voice, when it finally emerged clearly, surprised everyone with its steadiness. "No, Claire's right. I don't deserve this. I don't understand it. I don't even want it." She looked around the room, taking in her mother's careful neutrality, Marcus's obvious concern, Rosa's protective stance, and Claire's tear-streaked face. "I haven't earned this inheritance. Claire has. She's the one who stayed, who worked, who cared about the business and the family reputation." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "She's the one who should inherit everything." "Lanie, no." Rosa started, but Lanie held up a hand. "I can sign whatever needs to be signed to transfer everything to Claire. That's what Dad really wanted, obviously. This has to be some kind of mistake. Or, it's not a mistake." Samuel's quiet words stopped all conversation. He was looking directly at Lanie now, and something in his expression suggested there were layers to this moment that none of them had yet understood. "Your father was many things, but he was never careless with legal documents. Every word in this will was chosen deliberately." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "However, there is something else." Eleanor's sharp intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence. Samuel reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a second envelope, this one sealed with red wax and marked with Jonathan Walker's distinctive handwriting. "Your father left specific instructions that this document should only be presented if the family's reaction to the will proceeded exactly as it has." Claire wiped her eyes, trying to regain some measure of composure. "What do you mean, exactly as it has?" "He predicted that Lanie would offer to transfer the inheritance to you, Claire. He predicted that you would feel betrayed and angry. He even predicted that your mother would remain mysteriously calm throughout the entire reading." Samuel's voice carried a note of wonder, as though he were still amazed by Jonathan Walker's understanding of his own family. Marcus leaned forward. "What's in the second envelope?" Samuel held the sealed document carefully as though it contained something precious and dangerous. "I don't know. Your father's instructions were very specific. I was not to open this or reveal its existence unless certain conditions were met." He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. Those conditions have now been fulfilled. Rosa moved to stand behind both sisters, her hands resting gently on their shoulders. "Jonathan always was 10 steps ahead of everyone else," she said softly. "Even in death, apparently." The weight of possibility filled the room as Samuel held the unopened envelope. Whatever Jonathan Walker's final message contained, it had the potential to either heal the wounds that had just been torn open, or to inflict damage that might never heal. Claire found herself reaching for Lanie's hand without conscious thought, and for the first time in years her sister didn't pull away. "Open it," Eleanor said quietly. "Whatever he planned, whatever he thought we needed to hear, we're all here now. Open it." But Samuel shook his head, his expression grave. "I can't. The envelope can only be opened under one condition." He paused, looking directly at both sisters. "Both Claire and Lanie must agree to spend exactly 30 days living together in the family mansion, completing a series of challenges that your father designed before his death." The silence that followed felt eternal, heavy with the weight of choice and consequence. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows of the law office, but inside, 6 people sat frozen in a moment that would determine the future of the Walker family legacy. Whatever Jonathan Walker had planned, whatever truth lay sealed within that envelope, it would require his daughters to gamble everything on the possibility that their father's final act of love might be worth more than money, pride, or the safety of distance. The choice was theirs to make. Marcus's hand tightened on Claire's shoulder as Samuel's words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. 30 days. Living together. The very idea seemed impossible after what had just transpired, yet the sealed envelope in Samuel's hands promised answers that none of them could walk away from. "That's absurd," Claire said, though her voice lacked the fire it had carried moments before. The emotional outburst had drained something from her, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion that made even anger feel like too much effort. "We can't just drop our lives for a month to play some elaborate game Dad designed from beyond the grave." Eleanor shifted in her chair, and for the first time since entering the office she looked directly at her daughters. "Can't you?" The question carried weight that seemed to surprise even her. "What exactly are you dropping your life for, Claire? The business you thought you'd inherit? The financial security you were counting on?" The words stung because they were true. Claire had built her entire adult identity around being Jonathan Walker's successor, the responsible daughter who would carry on the family legacy. Without that future, what was she returning to? A consulting job she'd never loved? A marriage that had become more partnership than passion? A life carefully constructed around expectations that had just been shattered? Lanie studied the sealed envelope, as though it might reveal its secrets through sheer concentration. "What kind of challenges?" she asked Samuel, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know the specifics," Samuel admitted. "Your father was very secretive about the details. He only told me that there would be a series of tasks designed to—" He paused, consulting his notes. "To help you both understand what he was truly trying to leave you." Rosa moved closer to the sisters, her weathered hands folding over the back of Lanie's chair. "Your father spent many nights in his study these past months," she said quietly. "Writing, planning, sometimes talking to himself like he was rehearsing conversations. He was up until 3 in the morning just last week, and when I brought him coffee he looked up at me with tears in his eyes and said, 'Rosa, I hope they'll forgive me for waiting so long to do this right.'" The revelation hit both sisters differently. Claire felt a stab of something that might have been grief or might have been betrayal. How had she missed the signs that her father was struggling with something so profound? She'd seen him nearly every day, managed his calendar, sat in on his business meetings. How had she failed to notice that he was planning something this elaborate? Lanie, meanwhile, felt the familiar weight of regret settling over her shoulders like a too heavy coat. If she hadn't been so stubborn, so determined to prove her independence by cutting off contact, would she have known that her father was reaching out in the only way he knew how? Had her silence in his final months contributed to whatever pain Rosa had witnessed? Marcus cleared his throat, his practical nature asserting itself despite the emotional chaos surrounding them. "What happens if you don't agree to the challenge? Or if you start it but don't complete it?" Samuel's expression grew grave. "If either sister refuses to participate, or if they begin but fail to complete the 30 days and all the challenges, then the original will stands as written. Lanie keeps the entire inheritance, and this second document will be destroyed, unopened." "And if we do complete it?" Claire asked. "Then on day 31, we open the envelope together, and you learn what your father's true intentions were." Eleanor stood abruptly, her usual grace slightly unsteady. "I need some air," she announced, moving toward the door. But she paused with her hand on the handle, looking back at her daughters. "Whatever you decide, remember that your father never did anything without a reason. He might not have been good at expressing love, but he never stopped feeling it." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the remaining family members in uncomfortable silence. Through the office windows, the October afternoon was fading into early evening, casting long shadows across the mahogany conference table, where the 2 documents lay side by side, one revealing a shocking truth, the other promising an even greater mystery. "This is insane," Claire said again. But the words felt automatic now, a mantra she was repeating to convince herself rather than anyone else. "Maybe," Lanie replied, surprising everyone by standing up. "But we're already here. Our lives are already disrupted. And honestly," she paused, looking directly at her sister for the first time since the reading began, "I can't live with $50 million that I don't deserve, and you can't live without knowing what Dad was really trying to say to us." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his financial instincts warring with his desire to support his wife. "Claire, we should think about this practically. Our mortgage, the business loan we were planning to take out, your mother's medical expenses. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "What medical expenses?" Claire turned to face him, confusion replacing some of her emotional exhaustion. Marcus looked stricken, realizing he'd revealed something Eleanor had told him in confidence. "The anxiety medication. The therapy sessions she's been attending. I thought you knew." Another family secret. Another piece of the puzzle that Claire had missed despite being the daughter who stayed close, who paid attention, who cared about family obligations. How many other things had she failed to see while she was so focused on being the perfect heir? Rosa spoke into the growing silence, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had watched the Walker family for 3 decades. "Your father used to tell me that his greatest regret was not knowing how to show love without conditions. He said he was afraid that if he just gave you both his approval, you'd never push yourselves to become who you were meant to be." She looked between the sisters. "Maybe this challenge is his way of trying to love you both without conditions. Maybe he's asking you to prove something to yourselves, not to him." Lanie walked to the window, staring out at the Boston street below, where normal people were going about their normal lives, unaware that 6 floors above them, 2 sisters were being asked to gamble their futures on their father's posthumous wisdom. 30 days, she said finally, in the house where we grew up hating each other. "We didn't hate each other," Claire protested automatically. Lanie turned back to face her sister, and for a moment, the years seemed to fall away, revealing the children they had once been before competition and expectation had driven them apart. "Didn't we? Maybe not hate exactly, but we certainly learned to see each other as obstacles instead of allies." The honesty in her voice was startling, and Claire found herself considering her sister as though seeing her clearly for the first time in years. When had Lanie developed this capacity for self-reflection? When had she learned to speak so directly about painful truths? Samuel gathered the documents carefully, his movements precise and deliberate. "I need an answer today," he said gently. "Your father's instructions were very specific about timing. If you're going to attempt this challenge, you need to begin tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Claire's voice cracked slightly. "The 30 days start the moment you both enter the Walker mansion with the intention of staying. Your father wanted no time for second-guessing or elaborate preparations, just commitment." Marcus reached for Claire's hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," he said quietly. "But you need to decide for yourself, not for me or for our financial future. This is about you and your family." The generosity in his words brought fresh tears to Claire's eyes. How had she been so lucky to find someone who could love her without needing her to be perfect, even when she'd spent their entire marriage trying to be exactly that? Lanie moved away from the window, stopping in front of Claire's chair. "I'll do it if you will," she said simply. 30 days. Whatever challenges Dad designed. And if we hate each other even more at the end of it, at least we'll know we tried." Claire looked up at her sister, really looked at her. Lanie's borrowed dress, her uncombed hair, her lack of makeup or jewelry. But beneath the surface carelessness, Claire could see something she'd missed before. Strength. Resilience. The kind of quiet courage it took to build a life on your own terms, even when it disappointed everyone who claimed to love you. "All right," Claire said finally, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. 30 days. But I'm not doing this for the money, and I'm not doing this because I think Dad was right to manipulate us this way." "Then why?" Lanie asked. Claire stood up, smoothing her skirt one final time, a gesture that felt like putting on armor for a battle she wasn't sure she could win. "Because you're right. I can't live without knowing what he was really trying to tell us. And because—" she paused, the words difficult to form. "Because maybe it's time we figured out how to be sisters instead of competitors." Samuel smiled for the first time since the reading began, and even Rosa allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction. Whatever Jonathan Walker had planned, whatever truths lay hidden in the sealed envelope, his daughters were finally ready to discover them together. The real inheritance, it seemed, wasn't money at all. It was the chance to reclaim something they had lost so long ago that neither of them remembered exactly when it had disappeared, the possibility of understanding each other again. The Walker mansion rose from its manicured grounds like a monument to old money and older secrets, its Georgian facade unchanged since Claire's childhood, but somehow more imposing now that she was returning as a reluctant participant in her father's posthumous game. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the circular driveway where both sisters stood beside their respective cars, neither quite ready to take the first step toward the front door. Claire's black Mercedes sat next to Lanie's battered Honda Civic, the contrast between the vehicles somehow capturing everything about their divergent paths over the past decade. Claire had packed methodically: business attire for potential meetings, exercise clothes for the gym she assumed she'd find time to visit, and enough skincare products to maintain her polished appearance even while living in what felt like exile. Lanie's single duffel bag suggested a more pragmatic approach to the month ahead, or perhaps just a lifetime of traveling light. "It's bigger than I remembered," Lanie said quietly, tilting her head back to take in the full height of the three-story structure. "Or maybe I'm just smaller." Claire followed her sister's gaze to the third-floor windows of what had once been their playroom, now probably converted into one of Eleanor's many guest suites. Dad had the West Wing renovated 2 years ago, added a home office and expanded the library. She paused, realizing how much of her father's life she'd witnessed from the outside, attending family dinners and business meetings but never truly living here again after college. The front door opened before either sister could make the decision to approach, and Rosa appeared on the threshold like a guardian spirit who had been waiting for their arrival. She wore the same navy blue dress she'd favored for special occasions throughout their childhood, and her silver hair was pulled back in the familiar bun that had survived decades of fashion changes and family crises. "Mijas," she called out, using the Spanish endearment that had made both girls feel special when they were young. "Come inside before you catch cold. I've prepared your old rooms." The entryway felt like stepping into a museum of their own lives. The grandfather clock still chimed every quarter hour, with the same sonorous notes that had marked time throughout their childhood. The Persian rug beneath their feet showed the faded path where generations of Walkers had walked from the front door to the formal staircase. But it was the family portraits lining the walls that stopped both sisters in their tracks. Jonathan Walker's official portrait hung in the place of honor above the hall table, painted 5 years earlier when he'd been named Massachusetts Businessman of the Year. But surrounding it were dozens of smaller frames, family photos that chronicled 3 decades of Walker family life. Claire found herself staring at a picture of herself at age 8, gap-toothed and grinning as she held up a trophy from some long-forgotten academic competition. Beside it hung a photo of Lanie at age 5, paint-splattered and proud as she displayed a finger painting that had long since been relegated to a basement storage box. "He had these all reframed last month," Rosa said, noticing their attention. "Spent an entire weekend going through old photo albums, selecting which ones should go where. Said he wanted to make sure anyone who entered this house would understand that it was built by love, not just money." Lanie reached out to touch the frame of a picture she didn't remember being taken, both sisters building a sandcastle on the beach in Martha's Vineyard, their heads bent together in concentration as they worked to perfect some architectural detail only they could see. In the photo, Claire must have been about 10, Lanie 6 or 7, and they looked like what they had once been, best friends who happened to be sisters. "When did we stop doing that?" Lanie asked, her voice so quiet that Claire almost didn't hear her. Stop doing what? Working together. Putting our heads together like that, trying to build something. Lanie's finger traced the edge of the frame. When did we start seeing each other as competition instead of collaborators? Claire considered the question as they followed Rosa up the grand staircase, past more family photos, and beneath the chandelier that had illuminated every important Walker family moment for the past 30 years. I think it was gradual, she said finally. Like erosion. You don't notice it happening until one day you realize the landscape has completely changed. Their childhood bedrooms waited at opposite ends of the second-floor hallway, exactly as they had been left, but somehow both familiar and foreign after years of absence. Claire's room remained a shrine to her academic achievements. Honor roll certificates, debate team trophies, and perfectly preserved textbooks organized by subject and year. The pale blue walls and white furniture reflected the careful, controlled aesthetic she'd preferred even as a teenager. Lanie's room told a different story entirely. The walls were covered with artwork, some her own early attempts at photography and painting, others by artists she'd admired and tried to emulate. Her bookshelf held an eclectic mix of poetry collections, art history texts, and novels with cracked spines that suggested multiple readings. Even the rumpled quilt on her bed seemed to invite the kind of creative chaos that had always made Claire nervous. Your darkroom is still set up in the basement, Rosa told Lanie as she placed fresh towels on the desk chair. Your father had it cleaned and updated last month. New equipment, fresh chemicals, everything you might need. Lanie's eyes widened. He updated my darkroom? I haven't used it in years. He knew you were still taking photographs. He saw the exhibition announcement in the Portland paper. Rosa's expression softened. He was proud of you, Mija. He just didn't know how to tell you without making it sound like he was trying to buy your forgiveness. The revelation hit Lanie like a physical blow. Her father had known about her work, had cared enough to maintain her creative space, had even followed her career from a distance. All those times she'd convinced herself that he saw her as a failure, he'd been quietly supporting her in the only way he knew how. Rosa moved between the rooms with the efficiency of someone who had been caring for this family longer than either daughter had been alive. Dinner is at 7, just like always. Your mother won't be joining us tonight. She's having dinner with your Aunt Margaret, giving you both time to settle in. She paused at Claire's doorway. The first challenge envelope is waiting on the dining room table. Your father's instructions were very specific about timing. After Rosa left, the sisters stood in the hallway between their rooms, suddenly awkward with each other now that they were alone in the house where they'd grown up. The silence stretched until Claire cleared her throat. I should unpack, she said, though neither of them moved. Yeah, me too. Lanie shifted her duffel bag to her other shoulder. This is weird, isn't it? Being back here like this. Everything about this situation is weird, Claire replied, but her tone lacked the bitterness it had carried in Samuel's office. I keep expecting Dad to come around the corner and explain what we're supposed to be learning from all this. Maybe that's the point, Lanie said. Maybe we're supposed to figure it out ourselves. They separated to their respective rooms, but the walls between them felt thinner than they had in years. As Claire hung her business suits in the closet where her school uniforms had once waited in perfect rows, she could hear Lanie moving around next door, opening drawers, testing the old desk chair that had always squeaked, rediscovering the space she'd abandoned when she left for college. The house settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs, as though it too was adjusting to their presence after years of emptiness. Whatever challenges their father had designed, whatever truths waited to be discovered, they would face them in the place where they had first learned what it meant to be sisters. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the grounds where they had once played elaborate games of hide and seek, built snow forts in winter, and shared countless secrets under the old oak tree that still stood sentinel beside the garden. The Walker mansion held 3 decades of their history within its walls, the good memories and the painful ones, the moments of connection, and the gradual drift toward estrangement. Tomorrow, they would begin whatever journey their father had planned for them. Tonight, they were simply 2 sisters, alone together in a house full of ghosts, trying to remember who they had been before life taught them to compete instead of collaborate. The first challenge envelope waited downstairs, patient and mysterious as the man who had written it. The dining room chandelier cast warm circles of light across the mahogany table, where Claire and Lanie sat with untouched plates of Rosa's famous lasagna between them. The envelope lay in the center of the table like an unexploded bomb, Jonathan Walker's distinctive handwriting spelling out Challenge 1 in the same careful script that had signed their report cards and birthday cards for decades. "We should eat first," Claire said, though she'd managed only a few bites. The familiar comfort of Rosa's cooking felt strange in her mouth, as though her taste buds couldn't quite reconcile childhood comfort with adult anxiety. "I'm not really hungry," Lanie replied, pushing a piece of garlic bread around her plate. "Are you stalling, or am I stalling, or are we both stalling?" "Definitely both stalling." Claire set down her fork with a decisive click. "Okay, let's just get this over with." The envelope opened easily, revealing a single sheet of cream-colored paper that bore their father's meticulous handwriting. Claire read it aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My dear daughters, if you are reading this together, then you have taken the first step toward understanding what I was never able to teach you while I was alive. Your first challenge is this. Create something together that neither of you could make alone, using only items from your childhood rooms and the family library. You have 3 days. Remember that the value of what you create will not be measured in money, but in the bridge it builds between who you were and who you have become. With love and hope, Dad." Lanie leaned back in her chair, running her hands through her hair. "Create something together. That's wonderfully vague." "Dad was always better with broad concepts than specific instructions," Claire said, though her mind was already shifting into problem-solving mode. "What do we have to work with? My room has academic materials, research resources, organizational systems. Your room has art supplies, creative materials. And the library has everything else," Lanie finished. "Books on every subject known to humanity, plus Dad's collection of historical documents and business archives." They moved through the house like explorers mapping familiar territory that had somehow become foreign. The library, Jonathan's pride and joy, stretched across the entire east wing of the first floor. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes organized by his own arcane system that combined subject matter with emotional significance. Art history texts neighbored economic theory, while poetry collections shared space with business biographies. "He has first editions of everything," Lanie marveled, running her fingers along leather spines that probably cost more than most people's cars. "And complete archives of every major financial publication from the past 50 years, Claire added, pulling out a bound volume of Harvard Business Review from 1985. "Plus his personal papers, correspondence with world leaders, documentation of every major deal he ever made." They spent the first evening simply cataloging resources, spreading items across the library's central table like pieces of a puzzle they hadn't yet learned to solve. Claire's contribution included color-coded research folders, statistical analysis software on her laptop, presentation templates, and organizational charts that could break down complex information into digestible segments. Lanie brought sketch pads, cameras, art supplies, and an eye for visual storytelling that could transform dry data into compelling narrative. "We're approaching this completely differently," Claire observed as they worked late into the night. She had created neat piles organized by category, while Lanie's materials spread organically across available surfaces in patterns that seemed chaotic, but somehow made sense. "That's probably the point," Lanie replied, sketching absent-mindedly in one of her pads. "Dad knew we'd each bring different strengths. Maybe he wanted us to figure out how to combine them instead of competing with them." The breakthrough came on the second day, when Claire found a box of their childhood projects that Rosa had preserved in the library's storage closet. Inside were elaborate school presentations they'd created together before adolescence had taught them to work separately. A diorama of ancient Egypt that combined Claire's research on social hierarchies with Lanie's artistic recreation of pyramid construction. A science fair project about ecosystems that featured Claire's environmental data analysis alongside Lanie's photographic documentation of local wildlife. "Look at this," Claire said, holding up a poster board from their joint 7th grade history project. We did our entire family genealogy, going back 6 generations. I handled the research and documentation. You created all the visual elements and artistic interpretations. Lanie studied the faded poster with wonder. I remember this. You found that ancestor who fought in the Civil War, and I painted that portrait of him based on a photograph you discovered in the Historical Society archives. We got an A+, Claire said softly. Mrs. Henderson said it was the most comprehensive and creative project she'd ever seen. When did we stop doing this? Lanie asked, echoing her earlier question from the hallway. When did we decide that working together made us weak instead of stronger? The answer came to Claire with uncomfortable clarity. When Dad started comparing us. When every family dinner became a report on who was achieving more, contributing more, making him prouder. She set the poster down carefully. I started seeing your creativity as frivolous, because he seemed to value my academic achievements more. And you started seeing my success as proof that you were disappointing him. We both became so focused on earning his individual approval that we forgot we could support each other instead of competing, Lanie said. God, we were stupid. We were children, Claire corrected gently. We did what children do. We adapted to the environment we were given. That evening, they began their project in earnest. Claire's idea was ambitious, a comprehensive multimedia presentation that would trace the Walker family legacy from its origins through the present day, examining not just the financial success that Jonathan had built, but the human cost and emotional evolution of each generation. Lanie's artistic vision transformed the concept into something profound, a visual narrative that combined historical documents, family photographs, and original artwork to tell the story of how the pursuit of success had both connected and divided their family across decades. Claire handled the research and analysis, diving deep into family business records, immigration documents, and historical context that explained how their great-grandfather's small grocery store had evolved into Jonathan's financial empire. She created timelines, analyzed economic trends, and documented the strategic decisions that had built their wealth. Lanie worked with the visual elements, scanning and enhancing old photographs, creating artistic interpretations of family documents, and designing layouts that made complex information accessible and emotionally resonant. Her photographer's eye found beauty in unexpected places, the elegant handwriting in their great-grandmother's letters, the determination captured in their grandfather's immigration photos, the gradual evolution of family portraits from formal poses to more natural interactions. But the real breakthrough came when they began working side by side, Lanie sketching ideas while Claire analyzed data, their different approaches beginning to complement rather than conflict with each other. Claire's methodical organization provided structure for Lanie's creative insights, while Lanie's artistic vision helped Claire see emotional truths hidden within her careful research. Look at this pattern, Claire said on the final evening, pointing to a timeline she'd created showing 3 generations of Walker men. Each generation became more financially successful but less emotionally connected to their families. Great-grandfather had 7 children and worked from home. Grandfather had 4 children and worked downtown. Dad had 2 daughters and worked constantly. And each generation of women became more independent but more isolated, Lanie added, studying family photographs she'd arranged chronologically. Great-grandmother raised her children with community support. Grandmother had household help but fewer friends. Mom had every advantage but seems lonelier than any of them. Their project became more than either had envisioned alone, a family tree that grew both upward and inward, documenting not just names and dates, but emotional patterns, missed connections, and the gradual erosion of intimacy that accompanied each leap in social status. Claire's analytical framework gave structure to Lanie's artistic insights, while Lanie's visual storytelling revealed truths that Claire's data alone couldn't capture. On the 3rd day, as they put the finishing touches on their presentation, both sisters realized they had created something that neither could have achieved individually. Claire's research provided depth and credibility, but without Lanie's artistic vision, it would have remained dry academic exercise. Lanie's creative insights gave the project emotional resonance. But without Claire's analytical framework, the storytelling would have lacked substance and precision. "Dad would have loved this," Lanie said quietly as they arranged the final display boards in the library. "He did love this," Claire replied, understanding suddenly flooding through her. "This is exactly what he was hoping we'd discover. That we're stronger together than we ever were apart." The first challenge was complete, but its true accomplishment had nothing to do with the multimedia presentation spread across the library table. Instead, we taught you that love was something to be earned, rather than freely given. For the first time in their adult lives, both sisters moved simultaneously to embrace their mother, creating a circle of connection that had been missing from their family for nearly 3 decades. The challenge was complete, but its true accomplishment was the understanding that healing required not just acknowledgement of wounds, but the courage to feel them fully before letting them go. The third challenge envelope appeared on their breakfast table 2 days later, though neither sister remembered placing it there. Rosa's knowing smile suggested she'd been entrusted with its delivery, continuing her role as guardian of Jonathan's posthumous orchestrations. The envelope felt heavier than the others, as though it contained not just paper but the accumulated weight of 3 decades of sisterly grievances. Claire opened it with steady hands, though her voice wavered as she read aloud. "Forgive each other for the deepest hurt you've caused and take responsibility for the pain you've inflicted. True inheritance isn't about receiving. It's about releasing what no longer serves love." They chose their childhood playroom for this conversation, as though returning to the space where they'd once shared their closest bond might help them rediscover the honesty that had existed before competition taught them to guard their hearts. The room had been preserved exactly as they'd left it when adolescence made such spaces seem childish. A collection of board games, art supplies, and books that told the story of 2 girls who had once been inseparable. Lanie sat cross-legged on the familiar braided rug, running her fingers along its worn edges. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. "There are so many ways we've hurt each other over the years." "Start with the worst one," Claire said, settling into the window seat where she'd once read stories aloud to her younger sister. "The hurt that goes deepest, the one that changed everything between us." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken resentments and carefully buried pain. Finally, Claire took a shaky breath and began. "I encouraged Dad's criticism of you," she said, the words falling like stones into still water. "When you were in high school, and he'd dismiss your art as impractical, when he'd compare your grades unfavorably to mine, when he'd question your life choices. I didn't defend you. Worse than that, I sometimes agreed with him because it reinforced my position as the good daughter." Lanie's face remained carefully neutral, but her hands stilled on the rug. "I know," she said quietly. "You know?" Claire's voice cracked with surprise and shame. "I've always known. I could see it in your face during those dinner conversations, this little flash of satisfaction when Dad praised you at my expense. It hurt more than his criticism because I expected disappointment from him, but I thought you were supposed to be on my side." Claire felt tears she'd been holding back for years finally break free. "I was so afraid of losing his approval that I sacrificed our relationship to keep it. I told myself I was being realistic, that someone had to be the responsible daughter. But the truth is, I was terrified that if I defended you, he might see me as a failure too. And I punished you for that," Lanie said, her own voice thick with emotion. "I became more rebellious, more irresponsible, more everything that I knew would drive him crazy, partly because I was angry at him, but partly because I was angry at you. I wanted to force you to choose between his approval and our relationship." "You wanted me to fail?" Claire said, understanding flooding through her. "God, yes! I wanted you to mess up spectacularly, so you'd know what it felt like to disappoint him. I wanted you to understand what it was like to be the daughter who was never quite good enough." Lanie's honesty was brutal in its clarity. "When you got that promotion at 25, when you married Marcus, when Dad bragged about you to his business associates, I celebrated every tiny mistake you made because it proved you weren't actually perfect." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Claire stared at her sister, seeing for the first time the depth of resentment that had shaped so many of Lanie's choices. "But the worst thing I did," Lanie continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "was making you responsible for fixing all my problems while simultaneously resenting you for doing exactly that. Claire's breath caught. This was the hurt she hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself. Every time I got in trouble, financial problems, career setbacks, relationship disasters, I knew you'd step in. I knew you'd offer money, advice, connections, whatever I needed to clean up my mess. And I took it every time while telling myself you were being controlling, that you couldn't help interfering in my life. You turned me into your backup plan, Claire said, the words emerging with surprising calmness. You gotta be free and spontaneous and authentic because you knew I'd always be there to catch you when you fell. And I hated you for it, Lanie admitted. I hated that you were so competent, so reliable, so willing to sacrifice your own needs to take care of mine. But mostly I hated that I needed you to do it, because it proved that maybe Dad was right about me being irresponsible. Claire felt a lifetime of resentment shift and reshape itself into something closer to understanding. I enabled you because it made me feel necessary. Every time you needed rescuing, it proved that I was the valuable daughter, the one who could solve problems and fix things. I was so invested in being needed that I never stopped to consider whether my help was actually helping. We used each other, Lanie said with devastating clarity. I used your competence to avoid consequences. And you used my failures to prove your worth. The recognition of their mutual manipulation should have felt like another wound, but instead it brought an unexpected sense of relief. Finally, they were seeing their relationship clearly, not as a simple story of good daughter versus bad daughter, but as a complex dance of insecurity and need that had trapped them both in roles they'd outgrown. I'm sorry, Claire said, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what she was apologizing for. I'm sorry for not being the sister you needed, for choosing Dad's approval over your support, for making you feel like you had to compete for love instead of simply receiving it. I'm sorry too, Lanie replied, tears flowing freely now. I'm sorry for punishing you for Dad's failures, for making you clean up my messes while resenting you for it, for being so angry about not being the favored daughter that I never appreciated the sister who was actually there. They moved toward each other without conscious decision, meeting in the center of the playroom where they'd once built elaborate blanket forts and shared whispered secrets. The hug they shared felt different from any embrace they'd exchanged as adults, not the careful, obligatory affection of family gatherings, but the fierce, desperate connection of two people who had finally stopped pretending their wounds didn't exist. We can't change what we did to each other, Claire said through her tears, but we can choose what we do from here. I want to choose differently, Lanie whispered against her sister's shoulder. I want to choose us. They held each other in the room where they'd first learned what it meant to be sisters, surrounded by the remnants of their shared childhood and the promise of a relationship they could finally build on honesty instead of competition. The third challenge was complete. But its true accomplishment wasn't forgiveness. It was the courage to see each other clearly and choose love anyway. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the grounds where they had once played as children, but inside the playroom, two sisters sat together in the growing darkness, no longer afraid of what the light might reveal about the depth of their connection or the strength of their bond. Whatever challenges remained, they would face them as true allies for the first time in their adult lives. The fourth challenge didn't arrive in an envelope. Instead, Claire and Lanie woke to find Samuel Chen waiting in the dining room at 7 in the morning, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of a sleepless night. Spread across the mahogany table were financial documents, legal briefs, and newspaper clippings that painted a picture of crisis neither sister had anticipated. I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, Samuel said, his voice carrying an urgency that immediately put both women on edge. But your father's final challenge has a time constraint that can't wait for formal presentation. Claire poured coffee with hands that trembled slightly, her business instincts already analyzing Samuel's expression for clues about what they were facing. What kind of time constraint? Samuel opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a document bearing yesterday's date. Blackstone Acquisitions filed a hostile takeover bid for Walker Financial yesterday morning. They're offering 30% above market value to shareholders, with a deadline for acceptance of 72 hours. The words hit Claire like physical blows. Walker Financial, the company her father had built over 3 decades, the business she'd devoted 5 years of her life to understanding and protecting, was under attack. How is that possible? We have protective measures, shareholder agreements, which expire automatically 6 months after the death of the majority shareholder. Samuel explained grimly. Your father knew this would happen. In fact, these documents suggest he anticipated the exact timing and players involved. Lanie studied the newspaper clipping Samuel had placed before her. A Wall Street Journal article detailing Blackstone's aggressive acquisition strategy and their particular interest in mid-sized financial firms with strong regional presence. He knew someone would try to take over the company after he died? More than that, Samuel said, opening another folder. He planned for it. This entire scenario, the hostile takeover, the timing, even Blackstone's specific involvement, it's all detailed in confidential memos he prepared months before his death. Claire felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with financial crisis, her mind automatically shifting into the analytical mode that had made her so valuable to Walker Financial. What are our options? Can we fight the takeover? Do we have enough voting shares to block it? That depends, Samuel said carefully, on what you're willing to sacrifice to save the company. He spread out a complex financial analysis that bore Jonathan Walker's personal notes in the margins. The numbers told a stark story. Walker Financial was profitable but highly leveraged, with significant debt obligations that would come due within 18 months. The company needed an immediate capital infusion of $47 million to both fend off the hostile takeover and meet its upcoming financial obligations. $47 million, Lanie said quietly, understanding immediately. Almost exactly what I inherited. Your father calculated it precisely, Samuel confirmed. The inheritance is large enough to save the company, but using it for that purpose would mean taking on massive personal debt and responsibility. You'd essentially be betting your entire financial future on Walker Financial's continued success. Claire studied the documents with growing comprehension and horror. But that's not the only decision we have to make, is it? Samuel shook his head. The mansion, the art collection, Rosa's cottage, all the family properties, they're all mortgaged to provide additional operating capital for the business rescue. If you choose to save Walker Financial, you'll need to liquidate essentially everything else to make the financial structure work. Including Rosa's home? Lanie said, her voice tight with emotion. Including Rosa's home? Samuel confirmed. Unless you can find another $47 million to maintain both the business and the family properties. The sisters sat in stunned silence, absorbing the magnitude of the choice their father had designed for them. It wasn't just about money. It was about deciding what constituted the true Walker legacy. The business that Jonathan had built, and that Claire had devoted her career to understanding, or the family home and traditions that had shaped their childhood and provided Rosa with security for 3 decades. There's more, Samuel said quietly, producing a final document. Your father included a third option. You can accept Blackstone's buyout offer, which would provide enough money to maintain the family properties and ensure Rosa's security, but Walker Financial would cease to exist as an independent company. Most employees would be terminated, and the business Jonathan spent his life building would be dismantled for its assets. Claire pushed back from the table, her business training warring with emotions she'd never had to factor into financial decisions before. So our choices are, save the business and lose everything else, keep the family legacy and let Dad's life work be destroyed, or find some magical third option that doesn't exist. Actually, Lanie said slowly, studying the financial projections with the same careful attention she once gave to photographic compositions, I think there might be a fourth option, but it would require us to think like Dad, not just about money, but about value. She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching, her artistic mind visualizing solutions that pure financial analysis might miss. What if we don't try to save Walker Financial as it currently exists? What if we use this crisis as an opportunity to transform it into something that better reflects our values? Claire leaned forward, intrigued despite her exhaustion. What do you mean? Look at these employee records Dad kept, Lanie said. pulling out personnel files that showed not just salaries and performance reviews, but detailed notes about employees, families, aspirations, and contributions to the company culture. Dad cared about these people as individuals, not just assets. What if instead of fighting a hostile takeover or accepting defeat, we facilitate an employee buyout? The idea was audacious, but as Lanie explained her vision, Claire began to see the elegant logic behind it. They could use a portion of the inheritance to structure a leveraged buyout that would transfer ownership to the employees who had built the company's success. Walker Financial would survive, but as a worker-owned cooperative rather than a traditional corporation. The employees would have real ownership stake in the company's success, Claire said, her financial expertise beginning to flesh out Lanie's conceptual framework. And we could retain a smaller ownership percentage while using the remaining inheritance to establish a trust fund that maintains the family properties. Including Rosa's cottage, Lanie added. And we could convert the mansion into something that serves the community while preserving its history. Samuel listened to their brainstorming with growing amazement. You're essentially proposing to revolutionize your father's business model, while using your inheritance to create a sustainable legacy rather than simply preserving wealth. It's what Dad was trying to teach us, Claire realized. The difference between success and fulfillment isn't about accumulating more, it's about creating value that outlasts your own life. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, Claire's financial expertise combining with Lanie's creative vision to develop a comprehensive plan that none of them could have imagined individually. The employee buyout would be structured as a gradual transition over 5 years, giving the workers time to understand their new responsibilities while ensuring the company's stability. The Walker Family Trust would maintain the mansion as a community arts center, providing exhibition space for local artists while preserving the building's historical significance. Rosa would become the director of the cultural center, Lanie proposed, her excitement growing as the plan took shape. She knows more about this family's history than anyone, and she's always had such good instincts about people and relationships. And I could provide financial consulting to help the employee owners manage their transition, Claire added. It would be challenging work, but meaningful in a way my corporate job never was. By evening, they had created something neither had thought possible 12 hours earlier. A solution that honored their father's business legacy while transforming it into something more aligned with their own values. Walker Financial would survive, but as a model for democratic ownership rather than traditional capitalism. The family properties would be preserved, but as community resources rather than private luxury. Your father would be proud, Samuel said as they finalized the proposal documents. This plan accomplishes something he spent years trying to figure out: how to pass on not just wealth, but wisdom about what makes wealth meaningful. But even as they celebrated their innovative solution, both sisters understood that the plan's success would depend on something more valuable than money: their continued ability to work together, to trust each other's expertise, and to prioritize shared values over individual gain. The fourth challenge was complete, but its true test would come in the months and years ahead, as they transformed their theoretical solution into practical reality. They had learned to collaborate instead of compete, to support instead of undermine each other, and to see their father's legacy not as something to preserve unchanged, but as something to evolve and improve. As night fell over the Walker mansion, Claire and Lanie sat in their father's study, surrounded by the documents and plans that would reshape their family's future. They had chosen to build something new from the foundation he had provided, creating a legacy that honored both his business acumen and their own vision of what success could mean. Tomorrow, they would present their proposal to the Walker Financial employees and begin the complex process of transforming theory into reality. But tonight, they were simply two sisters who had finally learned to see each other as partners rather than rivals, allies rather than competitors. The business decision was made, but more importantly, they had discovered that the most valuable inheritance their father could have given them wasn't money or property. It was the opportunity to choose love over fear, collaboration over competition, and shared purpose over individual achievement. On day 28, Rosa delivered the final challenge envelope to their breakfast table with tears in her eyes. Her usually steady hands shook as she placed the cream-colored paper between their coffee cups, and for the first time in 3 decades of caring for the Walker family, she seemed uncertain about her role in their father's elaborate plan. "This is the last one, isn't it?" Claire asked gently, recognizing the weight of emotion Rosa carried. Simicha. The last challenge. Rosa wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. Your father, he made me promise to give this to you exactly on day 28, no matter what. But now that the moment has come. She paused, looking between both sisters with something approaching maternal pride. I think he already knew you would succeed before you even began. Lanie opened the envelope with reverent care, unfolding a single sheet that contained fewer words than any previous challenge. Show that you understand what I tried to teach you about the difference between success and fulfillment. The answer isn't in what you choose, it's in how you choose to love. The sisters exchanged glances across the breakfast table, both recognizing that this final test wasn't really a challenge at all. It was an invitation to demonstrate the transformation they'd already undergone, the healing they'd already achieved, and the love they'd already chosen to prioritize over competition and fear. I think we've already completed this one, Claire said softly. Everything we've done these past weeks, working together on the family legacy project, confronting Mom about her struggles, forgiving each other for our deepest hurts, creating a solution for the business that honors everyone's needs. That's all been about choosing love over success as Dad traditionally defined it. Lanie nodded, understanding flooding through her. He wasn't testing our ability to solve problems or make smart financial decisions. He was testing our willingness to see each other clearly and choose connection anyway. They spent the remaining 2 days quietly implementing their employee buyout plan, working side by side with a harmony that felt both new and ancient, as though they'd rediscovered a rhythm that had been interrupted but never truly lost. Claire's presentation to the Walker financial staff was masterful in its clarity and compassion, while Lanie's visual materials helped the employees understand not just the financial implications, but the emotional significance of becoming owners in the company they'd helped build. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Employees who had feared losing their jobs to a corporate takeover instead found themselves invited to become partners in a revolutionary business model. The transition would be challenging, but the opportunity to own a piece of something they'd invested their careers in building was worth the risk. On day 31, Samuel Chen arrived at the mansion, carrying the sealed document that had started their entire journey. Eleanor came too, along with Marcus, who had spent the past month marveling at his wife's transformation from dutiful daughter to visionary leader. Even Rosa was present, her role as family guardian finally complete. They gathered in the library where the sisters had created their first collaborative project, the room that had become the heart of their healing process. The sealed envelope sat in the center of the table like the final piece of a puzzle they'd been solving without realizing it. Before we open this, Claire said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, I want to say something. A month ago, I thought inheritance was about receiving what you'd earned through loyalty and hard work. I thought love was something you had to prove you deserved. And I thought inheritance was just money, Lanie added. I thought Dad had finally chosen me over you, and I didn't understand why that felt more like punishment than reward. But we were both wrong, they said almost simultaneously, then laughed at their unconscious coordination. Eleanor smiled through her tears. You sound like you did when you were little girls, finishing each other's thoughts. Samuel opened the sealed envelope with ceremonial care, unfolding several pages of Jonathan Walker's distinctive handwriting. The document wasn't a revised will or a legal addendum. It was a letter, written in the intimate tone of a father speaking directly to his daughter's hearts. Samuel cleared his throat and began to read. My dearest Claire and Lanie, if you are reading this together, then you have accomplished something I failed to do in 30 years of trying. You have learned to see each other as allies rather than competitors, as whole people rather than reflections of my expectations. The will Samuel read initially was never meant to be permanent. It was designed to shock you into working together, because I knew that nothing short of crisis would force you to truly collaborate. I spent months calculating exactly what would happen. Claire, your outrage at being passed over. Lanie, your confusion at receiving what you hadn't earned. Both of you eventually realizing that the only way forward was together. I have watched you both for years, seeing your individual strengths and talents, but also seeing how my own failures as a father had taught you to compete for love instead of sharing it freely. Claire, your competence and dedication were never in question, but I failed to show you that love isn't contingent on performance. Lanie, your creativity and independence were gifts I treasured, but I let my fear for your financial security override my pride in your artistic achievements. The real will, the one that matters, divides everything equally between you, but more importantly, it establishes a joint trust that can only be accessed through unanimous decisions. You will never again be able to compete with each other for resources, because your inheritance can only be used when you agree on how to use it together. The challenges I designed weren't tests, they were gifts. Opportunities to rediscover the collaboration that came so naturally to you as children before I inadvertently taught you that love was a competition with winners and losers. Your employee buyout plan exceeds anything I could have imagined. You have taken the business I built and transformed it into something that serves not just profit, but purpose. Your decision to convert our home into a community resource honors both our family's history and your shared values. Most importantly, you have learned to build on each other's strengths instead of exploiting each other's weaknesses. Success, as I defined it for most of my life, was about accumulation. Money, achievements, recognition, control. Fulfillment, as I finally understood in my last months, is about connection. Love freely given, talents shared generously, legacy measured not in dollars but in the lives you touch and the healing you create. You have both succeeded beyond my highest hopes. Not because of what you've accomplished individually, but because of what you've chosen to build together. The inheritance I'm most proud to leave you isn't money. It's the knowledge that you are sisters first, competitors never, and that love shared multiplies rather than divides. Your mother helped me plan every detail of this month, though she wasn't sure you would forgive me for the manipulation involved. Eleanor, if you're reading this with our daughters, thank you for believing that sometimes love requires risk, that sometimes healing requires courage, and that sometimes the only way to teach people what they're capable of is to trust them to discover it themselves. Claire and Lanie, you have taught me something I never expected to learn after death, that the greatest success a father can achieve is raising daughters who no longer need his approval to know their worth, who no longer compete for his love because they've learned to love each other unconditionally. I am proud of you both. I am proud of who you've become individually, but I am most proud of who you've chosen to become together. The sealed document was never about money or property or business decisions. It was about waiting until you were ready to read these words and understand their truth. You are enough, exactly as you are, and you are stronger together than either of you could ever be alone. All my love and all my hopes for your continued partnership, Dad. The library fell silent except for the sound of quiet crying. Not the desperate tears of grief, but the cleansing tears of understanding and resolution. Rosa moved quietly around the table, offering tissues and gentle touches, her own eyes bright with satisfaction at seeing the family she'd helped raise finally whole. Eleanor spoke first, her voice soft but clear. He spent months writing and rewriting that letter. He wanted to make sure every word conveyed not just what he thought, but what he felt. Writing it helped him process his own regrets and hopes. Claire reached for Lanie's hand across the table, and this time the gesture felt as natural as breathing. We really did it, didn't we? We figured out how to be sisters again. We figured out how to be ourselves again, Lanie corrected gently. The selves we were before we learned to hide behind roles and expectations. Marcus cleared his throat, his practical nature asserting itself even in this emotional moment. So what happens now? Legally, I mean. How do we handle the transition from the original will to this real one? Samuel smiled, pulling out another document. Your father anticipated that question too. The legal framework is already in place. The joint trust activates automatically, the employee buyout can proceed as planned, and the Community Arts Center has full legal standing. He thought of everything. Except, Rosa added with a knowing smile, he didn't anticipate how well you would work together. Your solutions went beyond even his hopes for what you might accomplish. As the afternoon sun slanted through the library windows, the Walker family, reunited, healed, and transformed, began planning their future together. They had received their father's final gift not through money or property, but through the opportunity to rediscover love without conditions, partnership without competition, and legacy defined not by what they inherited, but by what they chose to build together. The month-long challenge was complete. but its true inheritance would last for generations. Two sisters who had learned to see each other clearly and love each other anyway, and a family that had finally understood the difference between success and fulfillment. 6 months later, the Walker Community Arts Center hummed with the kind of productive energy that comes from purpose, aligned with passion. Claire stood in what had once been her father's formal dining room, now converted into a bright conference space where she was conducting a financial literacy workshop for the worker owners of Walker Financial. The mahogany paneling remained, but the intimidating formality had been replaced by comfortable seating arrangements and whiteboards covered with collaborative planning notes. The third quarter projections show we're ahead of our initial targets, Claire explained to the group of 12 employees who had transitioned from workers to owners over the past months. But more importantly, employee satisfaction surveys indicate that productivity and creativity have increased significantly since we implemented the cooperative model. Sarah Martinez, who had been Jonathan's executive assistant for 15 years, raised her hand with the confidence of someone who had discovered her voice in decision-making. The profit-sharing structure is working better than any of us anticipated. When everyone has skin in the game, everyone cares about the outcome. Claire smiled, remembering her father's belief that people worked harder when they felt valued, rather than just compensated. The employee-owned Walker Financial had proven him right in ways that traditional corporate metrics couldn't capture. Turnover had dropped to 0, innovation had increased dramatically, and client satisfaction had reached record highs as employees took personal ownership of every interaction. Through the conference room's French doors, she could see the main gallery where Lanie was curating the center's newest exhibition, a collection of works by local artists that explored themes of family, legacy, and healing. The mansion's grand rooms had been transformed into exhibition spaces that retained their historical elegance, while serving the community in ways Jonathan Walker had never imagined, but would have deeply appreciated. Mrs. Walker-Morrison called David Chen, Samuel's nephew who had joined the financial cooperative as their youngest member. "My sister is one of the artists in the current exhibition. She wanted me to thank you and Ms. Walker for creating opportunities for emerging artists to display their work professionally." "Thank your sister for creating beautiful art," Claire replied. "And thank you for reminding me that I need to catch the opening reception." The workshop concluded with the kind of collaborative energy that had become characteristic of the new Walker Financial. Decisions were made collectively, challenges were addressed as a team, and success was measured not just in profit margins but in the well-being of everyone involved. Claire packed up her materials with the satisfaction of someone who had finally found work that felt like calling rather than obligation. She found Lanie in the main gallery, making final adjustments to the lighting for a photography series that explored the relationship between urban development and family displacement. Her sister moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had discovered that her artistic vision could serve others while remaining authentically her own. "How did the workshop go?" Lanie asked, stepping back to assess the visual impact of a particularly powerful photograph showing an elderly woman sitting in an empty house surrounded by moving boxes. "Better than I expected. The cooperative model is working so well that other companies are sending representatives to learn about our structure." Claire studied the photograph with growing appreciation. "This piece is incredible. The artist captured something universal about loss and resilience." Elena Rodriguez. She's documenting families affected by gentrification in East Boston. Her work is getting attention from galleries in New York, but she wanted to show here first because this center represents what community support can accomplish. They walked through the gallery together, discussing the exhibition's themes and the practical aspects of managing the arts center. Their collaboration had evolved into something effortless. Claire's organizational skills complementing Lanie's artistic vision, their different perspectives creating solutions neither could have reached alone. Rosa appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of her famous empanadas, prepared for the evening's reception. At 67, she had embraced her role as the center's cultural coordinator, with the enthusiasm of someone who had spent decades caring for one family and now got to care for an entire community. "The caterers will arrive at 4, Rosa announced. "But I wanted to make sure we had proper food, not just those fancy appetizers that leave people hungry." "Rosa, you don't have to cook for every event," Lanie said gently, though they all knew the conversation was futile. Rosa's definition of hospitality would never be limited to official duties. "Mia," Good food brings people together. Your father understood this, even if he didn't always show it. He used to tell me that the best business deals happened over meals, where people felt comfortable enough to be honest with each other. Eleanor arrived as they were arranging the reception space, carrying a box of programs she'd had printed at her own expense. Her involvement in the Arts Center had given her a sense of purpose she'd never found in charity galas and society functions. Working with community members on practical projects had helped her develop the authentic connections that had been missing from her carefully curated social life. The mayor's office called, Eleanor announced. They want to feature the center in their cultural tourism campaign. Apparently, our model of preserving historical architecture while serving contemporary community needs is attracting attention from urban planners across the country. Marcus entered from the business office, where he'd been reviewing the center's financial sustainability reports. His initial skepticism about leaving traditional corporate law to help manage a community arts center had given way to genuine enthusiasm for work that felt meaningful, rather than merely profitable. The numbers look excellent, he reported. Revenue from the gallery, workshop fees, and event rentals is covering operating costs, and the endowment from the Walker Trust ensures long-term stability. We're actually in a position to expand programming next year. As the afternoon progressed, the mansion filled with community members, local artists, Walker Financial employee owners, and supporters who had come to celebrate not just the current exhibition, but the broader transformation the center represented. Claire found herself moving easily between conversations about financial sustainability and artistic vision, business strategy, and community impact. She paused in the main hallway, studying the family photographs that still lined the walls but now told a different story. The pictures of Jonathan, Eleanor, herself, and Lanie remained, but they were surrounded by new images. Photographs of community events, exhibitions, workshops, and celebrations that showed the mansion serving its intended purpose as a gathering place for people who shared values rather than just wealth. Lanie joined her, carrying 2 glasses of the wine Marcus had selected for the reception. "Do you think Dad would be proud of what we've done with his house?" "I think he'd be amazed," Claire replied honestly. "He wanted us to understand the difference between success and fulfillment, but I don't think he imagined we'd be able to create something that serves both so completely." "Sometimes I feel like he's still here," Lanie said quietly. Not in a spooky way, but in the sense that the love he couldn't figure out how to express while he was alive somehow lives in the choices we make now. Eleanor approached them, her expression soft with contentment that had taken months to develop. "He is still here," she said simply. "Not as a ghost, but as a foundation. Everything we've built, the business cooperative, the art center, our healed relationships, it all rests on the love he didn't know how to show us directly." The reception officially began as the gallery filled with laughter, conversation, and the kind of community energy that transforms spaces from museums into living, breathing centers of connection. Claire watched Lanie guide visitors through the exhibition, explaining not just the artistic techniques but the stories behind each piece, helping people see how art could illuminate their own experiences of family, loss, and healing. Rosa moved through the crowd like a gracious hostess, remembering everyone's names and making connections between people who might not have spoken otherwise. Eleanor engaged in substantive conversations about the intersection of historical preservation and community service, her diplomatic skills finally serving purposes she genuinely cared about. Marcus handled the practical aspects of the event with quiet efficiency, ensuring that everything ran smoothly so others could focus on the meaningful interactions that made such gatherings worthwhile. As evening fell, Claire stepped out onto the mansion's front terrace, looking across the grounds where she and Lanie had once played as children. The property remained beautiful, but its beauty now served a purpose beyond private enjoyment. Families from the neighborhood used the gardens for picnics, local artists used the conservatory for workshops, and the carriage house had been converted into affordable studio space for emerging creators. Lanie joined her on the terrace, both sisters comfortable in the kind of companionable silence that had replaced the awkward tension of their estranged years. "Do you ever miss it?" Claire asked. "The way things were before? When we thought success meant having more than other people instead of contributing more to other people?" Lanie considered the question seriously. I miss the simplicity of thinking that love was something you either earned or you didn't. But I don't miss the loneliness of believing that being loved meant someone else had to be less loved. Inside the mansion, the reception continued with the warm energy of people who had found community around shared values rather than shared circumstances. The Walker legacy had been transformed from private wealth into public good, from individual achievement into collective flourishing. 6 months after their father's elaborate plan had forced them back together, Claire and Lanie had created something neither had imagined possible: a life that honored both his business acumen and their own vision of what success could mean when it served love rather than ego, community rather than competition, healing rather than accumulation. The inheritance they had received wasn't just money or property. It was the opportunity to transform pain into purpose, rivalry into partnership, and legacy into something that would outlast any individual achievement. They had learned the difference between success and fulfillment, not through lecture or example, but through the patient process of choosing love over fear, collaboration over competition, and generosity over scarcity. As the stars appeared over the Walker mansion, now the Walker Community Arts Center, two sisters stood together on the threshold between past and future, grateful for the father whose final gift had been teaching them how to love each other without conditions, and how to build a legacy that served not just their family, but their entire community. The story that had begun with shocking betrayal and bitter competition had become something far more beautiful, a testament to the healing power of honest love, the transformative potential of authentic partnership, and the enduring truth that the most valuable inheritance anyone can receive is the knowledge of how to love and be loved without reservation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,